Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Common Language. We are going to discuss Trump's presidency today, namely how authoritarianism is being normalized and what the impact of a fascist state really looks like. But before we get to all of this, I'm going to pass it over to Mac to give us the top line and tea and what's going on currently.
Thanks, Case. Very interesting things happening. Even again, as Congress remains out on recess, they still have one more week to return. But the lay of the land, the big three for today is one, major upheaval, chaos, etc. at the CDC. In our last episode, we focused on MAHA, Make America Healthy Again. And in that episode, we talked about how there are multiple fractions within the MAHA coalition, and even within the VAX, how there's like different points of view and positions on that specific piece. And we're seeing the consequences unfolding. The CDC director was fired from her position, and this was a decision that came as a result of her inability to comply with some vaccine mandates that the administration was looking to roll out under the CDC. And following her firing from her post, many other high level CDC employees elected to resign from their post. They weren't necessarily fired, but it was a trickle down effect that this firing had. So lots of folks from the CDC are out in an act of protest and an act of solidarity with the CDC director. And as a result, RFK has named his deputy, Jim O'Neill, as the new acting director of the CDC. So I think this will be another great story to continue to watch. As you all know, CDC, should another pandemic happen, knock on wood, but should it happen, we would not be in a great state to respond to it. Secondly, the federalization of DC has continued to play out in Washington, DC. There are still troops on the ground. Some of the latest updates there are that Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth directed the National Guard to now be armed on the streets. Prior to this, they were not. Now they are. Another big update here is that Trump has made it pretty clear that he plans to do this in other cities, or at least threatening to do them in other cities. Chicago is our nation's third largest city. It's another big Democratic stronghold. The mayor, Brandon Johnson, Trump is very unhappy with him. And Governor Pritzker has said that he will do everything in his power to make sure this does not happen because he believes it is illegal. The third story to cover today is the gerrymandering update. Those efforts are still rolling out. And I think a big consequence of that is that Gavin Newsom has really elevated to a new level of
He has risen.
yes, he is now the, I feel like he already was on this path. And so it's an understatement to say rising star of the Democratic Party because I
Yeah.
think he already was, but now it's become a front runner for the Democratic seat for president. Again, we still have many years and months ahead before we get there, but I think it's caused a conversation as to is he the right pick? And it's already some infighting within the Democratic Party about this. Is he progressive enough? His record, etc. Nonetheless, he has taken center stage and really captivated, I think, an audience. And I think all eyes and ears are on him now.
Yeah, totally. And I think one thing about Gavin is that he is comfortable saying and doing whatever. And that is a criticism of the Democratic Party. They're not taking risks, they're not being bold enough. And Gavin is coming out and he's really swinging. His videos are super unhinged. He has merch. He got Kendrick Lamar. I think that he's definitely stepping up. People are starting to see him as a real player. I'm really curious to see if and who could challenge him in that way because I'm just not seeing a lot of bold action from anyone else. So you have to give credit where it's due here, which is that he's showing up for his state. He's showing up to really defend democracy in that way when we talk about gerrymandering. And he's also really aware of the power of media and how to use it. It's saying something.
He's showing himself to be a formidable contender with Trump because he does not back down. He says what he says, and he is employing the same tactics that we saw Trump use to captivate people, which is social media, just
Mhm.
being very outlandish and a little unhinged maybe, but I think it's working and he's getting the attention, which is in today's age the paramount
Yeah.
is just getting people's attention. Like I said, there's still so much time before the next presidential election, and you just never know what can happen. And even in today's episode, we'll talk about will there even be a presidential election to come? Because the way things are heading, folks are questioning if Trump will loosen his reins and give up power.
Yeah. It's going to be
Um,
interesting.
Yeah, so I think that's a perfect segue to dive into the meat of our episode today.
Yes, let's do it. Okay, so before we fully get into it, I do want to really put the caveat that we're having this discussion for multiple reasons. One, I think it's very important for us to talk about each of these concepts and also understanding the real meaning behind them. Because what happens very often is that you have these words get thrown around and it just gets more confusing, and fear mongering just goes hand in hand with that. And that's definitely not what we're trying to do. We are actually trying to empower by giving the information. Let's talk about what the definitions are. And I'm going to go through the definitions of autocracy, oligarchy, fascism, and authoritarian. And then we're going to go through what is a democracy. So we're going to go through each of these topics to really destigmatize them. And then we can talk about why it's important that they are being used and really where we can go from here. Because what they do is they really set the groundwork for understanding the nuance of being in a place where we don't have control when we should. And that's really the big difference. So, without further ado, let's go through what is autocracy. So, autocracy is a government in which one person possesses unlimited power. Next, what is an oligarchy? An oligarchy is government in which a small group exercises control, especially for corrupt and selfish purposes. What is fascism? Fascism is a populist political philosophy, movement, or regime that exalts nation and often race above the individual, that is associated with a centralized autocratic government headed by a dictatorial leader, and that is characterized by severe economic and social regimen and by forcible suppression of opposition. What is an authoritarian? Of relating to or favoring a concentration of power in a leader or an elite not constitutionally responsible to the people. So, autocracy, oligarchy, fascism, authoritarian. The key message here is that the people are not in charge. There is one person in charge, or the government is very tight and possess unlimited power, and they're doing things for their own interests. So rather than doing things for everyone, it's really to accommodate one specific group. So let's review what is a democracy. Democracy is government by the people, rule of majority, a form of government in which people elect representatives to make decisions, policies, laws, etc., according to law, and an organization or situation in which everyone is treated equally and has the right to participate equally in management, decision making, etc. And now you can see the very clear difference.
Yeah.
And I think it's really nice to lay it out this way because when these big words are being used, It is just.
Yeah, I would agree. And I would say that for me, the distinction between a democracy and the other terms that you were sharing the definition of fascism, authoritarianism, oligarchies is one, that there in democracies, there are fair and free elections. There are regular elections
Yep.
that are held on a regular basis, and people are able to vote for their elected representatives. And then within the government, there's a system of checks and balances so that the executive branch or the judicial branch
Mhm.
does not outweigh, right, the other branches, and so that there's not like one specific part of government that has the most power. And so the checks and balances is also necessary in a democracy as well.
Yes, absolutely. And I feel like the big theme here is also the idea that power can be taken and power can be consolidated. Whereas in a democracy, there is no like consolidation of power because there's a rule of the majority. We're already in the system of working together. And as far as we've known America, we've run as a democracy. We have elected officials that need to be reelected. And this is a key difference. And it's funny because I do remember during Trump's inauguration, there was like this whole thing of, and I won't be leaving vibe that was set. I feel like it got real quiet. I haven't heard about that
Mhm.
since the inauguration, but everything that he's doing around it does make you feel like, but we're not going to fearmonger on this podcast. We are just going to
No.
continue moving.
Yeah, but I think
And
that is an interesting point, Case. I think the other third thing in a democracy is that peaceful transition of power
yeah,
when your time is up, based on whatever the timing is. You
you
go
exit.
willingly. There are no
Correct.
insurrections. There is no hostile takeovers. There isn't a claiming that the election was stolen and therefore it's illegitimate, right?
Mhm.
We believe that all of our elections are legitimate, and denouncing any type of legitimacy as a tactic to retain control is typically anti-democratic.
Right. And we saw Trump have a very hard time doing that the last time around. Very hard. So you do wonder what will happen when it's not an option technically. But this also leads us to autocracy in general, and I really want to highlight Stacey Abrams, who is a former House member. She is amazing, and she just really breaks things down super well. So Mac is going to go through her opinion on autocracy and the 10 steps that it takes to get there.
Yes. So, high level, as Casey was saying, I think Stacey Abrams is just extremely brilliant, such a powerful force. She's a lawyer by training, she's an activist, and she released her theory of what she calls the 10 steps to autocracy. It's important to note that this theory was based on a framework by a Princeton professor, Kim Lane Sheppel, and Abrams applied that framework to her theory and outlined what the 10 distinct steps are to an autocracy. And so we're going to go down the list 1 through 10, and then we'll talk about what this means and what it's particularly like in the context of now in 2025 in our democracy, what this means. So, first, winning an election with no intention of relinquishing power. Two, exceeding executive power. Three, compromising or neutralizing competing branches of power. Four, attacking the media. Five, gutting government institutions. Six, targeting those doing good work. Seven, blaming others. Eight, suppressing eyewitness accounts of political violence. Nine, incentivizing private violence and criminalizing dissent. And 10, preventing future elections.
Yes. So there's a lot to unpack here. And when I first heard of this theory and when I first read it, I was like, oh. Because Stacey claims that we're at step 9, incentivizing private violence and criminalizing dissent, which I
Mm.
totally agree. And I think that what's going on in DC right now is perfectly in line with number 9. But I also feel that there are so many other steps in here that have been so loud in the Trump administration. You think about gutting government institutions, boy, did he.
That was
And
his first kind of directives. The big thing that he did when he first got in office was set up Doge
yep,
to eliminate many federal agencies and government institutions. So I would agree with you.
yeah. And something that I want to say about autocracy in general. So, like we're saying, we're hearing all these words, but I actually think there is a way to frame autocracy as a good thing. If you're someone who wants clean streets and doesn't want immigrants in this country and who wants safe cities and that's a priority for you, then an autocracy is going to get you that because you're going to have military on the streets and deportations at a very high rate that are creating this new normal, right? Because the second that we start doing something, we feel the shock, and then as it continues to go on, it gets normalized. That's just what happens. It's human nature. If you're a Trump supporter and you want clean streets, no immigrants, safe cities, that is part of what you'll get with this. And I think that is some of the immediate effects that we're seeing right now, his crackdown on these topics that are making people feel like, wow, he's really doing something. But what happens when it's all done? We've sacrificed our freedoms, and then how far else do we go? Like for me, we're already at an extreme. I don't
Right.
think that our cities were so dangerous that they need to be monitored to the level that they're being monitored. I don't believe in mass deportations, and I certainly don't believe in violating people's rights.
And I think that's the challenge here. It's okay, yes, maybe you'll have pristine, super clean streets with the military present. Maybe you'll have a zero crime rate or something, but at what cost? And usually that's at the cost of your individual freedoms and liberties
Yep.
and equality as
Yep.
well. And I also think this goes back to the kind of overarching thing here is when we talk about all these different terms, that's all political theory, right? This is
Right.
how it would work in theory, but we know that in practice, in an implementation, you're not going to necessarily get those results and it's not actually going to be how it works because we're humans and there's so much complexity that is a part of the equation. And so even democracy, for example, right, like the democracy in the US even pre-Trump was not perfect
No.
and it never will be perfect. There are many aspects of our society and the way that we govern that undermine our democracy. I think the Electoral College undermines our democracy. I think that DC doesn't have statehood. That undermines our democracy. It is not perfect, and it's all an experiment. We talk about America, this great experiment. It's this social experiment. It's this experiment of democracy. So you talk about these things like authoritarianism and fascism or communism or socialism, whatever it is,
Right.
right? In theory, but it's important to use your critical thinking skills and understand what the real life impact, implementation, and consequences are of that type of governing.
And that's where I think we start to really lose the plot here. We have people who are so focused on singular issues that they're not seeing everything as a whole. So that's what I really like about these 10 steps is that it breaks it down in the ways in which something may promote outrage in you, something else might not. Seeing it all laid out clearly step by step, you can see that it's one thing compiling onto the next thing. And what is the end goal here? The US. land of the free, land of opportunity, the American dream. These
Mhm.
were all things that growing up were rhetoric for the
Mhm.
US. That's how we promoted ourselves. We've been
Mhm.
a progressive country, yet in so many ways, we have not been able to move the needle. So, to your point, yes, we've lived in a democracy, but it's not a perfect science. We still have super big issues with healthcare, housing, childcare. So the cost of living and what it takes to provide for your family, be healthy, and survive is getting tougher and tougher. And why is it that now we have a president who wants to consolidate more power and he's doing it in a way that only benefits a small group of people? Like, how is that helping us? And I feel like this opens the conversation for a really good discourse with conservatives to understand what it is that they feel they're gaining from this. Because I
Mhm.
personally feel that when we talk about a lot of the conservative narratives, it's really more about them preserving their own personal beliefs, and it has a lot less to do with systems at work. And it's more about access to abortions are against my religion. I believe that marriage should be between a man and a woman. I believe that my finances shouldn't be taxed as much, and this is money that I'm bringing in. Like, those are their ideals. But I don't
Mhm.
understand how that is like equating to I want someone to be in charge of everything.
I think it's interesting because it really illustrates how Trump was able to capitalize and leverage certain people who are fixated on these single voter issues
Right.
and use that as a vehicle to exploit them and take control. And what's helpful with these steps is that it does help define something that can be so muddled and complex. And particularly politics is just that. Democrats, Republicans, every politician, I think, is not immune to doing things that behoove them and their political party.
Totally.
That's just the nature of politics.
That's
And
also part of the
Trump,
problem. That is part of the problem that that's
right.
been created on both sides. It's normalized
Right.
on
And
both
so
sides.
and that's exactly why we're here today. And it's I think that's why democracy can help to offset that because the will of the people is exercised, who
Mm.
gets to represent us and make those decisions that
Yep.
shape our politics and our government. And then you have these systems of checks and balances so that one singular person, one singular branch isn't getting away with too much. No politician, including Donald Trump himself, is ever going to come out and say, I want to be a dictator. I'm doing this because I want to be a dictator. We're not
Right.
there yet, at least. He's not going to come out and say, oh, yeah, I don't want Black people to own homes. So it has to be a little bit more covert than that. So these steps help to bring that clarity and help us to understand exactly what is happening, shed some light, shed some definition on it. And I think that we, while he has not proclaimed to be doing any of these 1 to 10 steps, we can see different actions, different policy makings, different decisions fall in line with these steps.
Yes, I agree with this. And I also feel like it's so easy to pull up examples to prove this point exactly. A great one, the implementation of Doge on the whole, completely authoritarian. Like he's saying that our systems are no longer needed. And they're no longer needed because they will be replaced. But again, I will always say what I really feel. And I really feel like Trump executed this brilliantly because he came in and said, there's just so much waste in our government, and I'm going to help clean that up. And honestly, I believe that there is because any corporation, and the government is a corporation, whether or not you want to see it that way, They all have waste. Everyone has waste. There's always things that we can do and we can improve. And because Trump comes at everything from this like businessman mindset, he gets to say things that a normal politician wouldn't normally say and wouldn't normally do for the sake of him being more authentic and more himself. And that has bought him a big following, but it's also allowed him to do things that other presidents wouldn't have ever dared do. And he's basically saying that the federal government and everyone who works for me is really not that necessary. Bring Doge in and
Yeah.
cut the fat.
And it goes to the same extent with things we've covered in previous episodes, higher ed, right? In our
Yep.
second episode, Schools Out Forever, we talked about this administration targeting higher education, colleges, and universities. And that in part can be a tactic because you're essentially saying these institutions of higher learning they're the dissent, right?
Yep.
Because they're creating and lifting up all these viewpoints that he doesn't agree with.
Hmm.
So, what does he do? Try to shut it down.
Right.
Same thing when we covered Make America Healthy Again on our last episode and what we see playing out at the CDC now. They are very anti science, anti institution, and that too can be a tactic.
Especially in the media, which let's go back to Trump term one. He fought the media tooth and nail. They were constantly at battle because he was the first president to go out there and just say crazy stuff. And the media was calling him out for it. And he didn't like that. So this time around, it feels like Trump term one, he was like playing around in the baby sandbox. And also, Republicans didn't have control of the House and Senate, so he didn't have full control to do everything that he wanted to execute. It was like he got his feet wet. And now he's coming back. He's got it all. Steamroll everyone. And yes men who are going to do whatever I want them to do. Pete Hegseth, RFK Jr.,
Speaker Mike Johnson.
Kristi
Mm-hmm.
Noem. He's just got a lot of people who are just out there doing his bidding, no problem, no questions asked. It's like he found all of the friends that you would call if you had to hide the body, and they're all like,
Yeah.
pick me.
Because during the first term, what did we see? We had people who stood up to him and said,
Right.
actually, no, that's illegal. You
Yeah.
cannot do that.
Yep.
And they were promptly fired. And that's what we saw play out in the first term. And he learned his lesson. The second term, he was like ride or dies only.
Yeah.
Because if you do not defer to me, you're out. So he was very intentional at picking people that would be that yes man to him.
Yep. And I also want to double down on the this idea that he had practice, right? So Trump term one was practice for now. So that's also why I think he's able to move and push these barriers quicker and faster because he's afraid of nothing. The levers of power are
Right.
effectively being squashed by him and this gang. Going back to the media, Trump term one like was bang back and forth, like shots being fired on both sides. This time around, they canceled the Colbert Report. The head of 60 Minutes leaves because they're all getting pressure from him to get in line or get lost. And it's
Right.
very different messaging because we just had a lot of resistance. And I just think that no one really expected Trump to win the first time around. And when he did, it was like, oh my gosh, wow. And he had to learn his bearings of being president. And now that he's back for round two, he's mad that he lost that second term to Biden and he's on a vengeance. Now he's wearing a hat that says Trump was right about everything. Dude, you're unhinged and you're the president of the United States.
Yeah, I think the media one is particularly important because, like you said, I think during the first term he set the stage. The term like fake news, right? Remember when that's what he would say to attack what he would call, and I think what is widely seen as the legacy media or the
Yeah.
established media. And to that point, I do see that. And I think there is some universal understanding that we do need diversity in media coverage. What we see going on in DC points that out because, for example, right now, a lot of folks in DC are actually calling for international media to cover what's going on in DC because they fear a lot of American media will not cover this accurately.
Yep.
And that's because, right, the media has just been under attack. And we saw our president get kicked off of a social media platform. And
Yep.
because we saw the way he was able to use that. And he has now created his own media platform to say what he wants to say without fear or consequence of any type of regulation or monitoring or censorship. And so he positioned the media as something that people cannot trust, that they're corrupt. And again, to some extent, yes, this is true. These are corporations, these media
Yep.
companies.
Absolutely.
I am not saying that they're always presenting 100% truth and there's no bias in media coverage. Okay, so to be clear, however, him trying to delegitimize the media and people like you see Carolyn Levitt, our current press secretary, they spin and they try to deprioritize again these legacy media entities in favor of media entities that recover them in a favorable way.
Anything that doesn't behoove Trump or make him look good, he's mad about.
Right.
So again, we're inherently going based off of one person's ideas, one person's perception. So,
So
mm,
the biggest thing I think we've seen on the attack of the media that will have very detrimental outcomes is the defunding of public broadcasting.
I meant to bring this up.
This is major, okay? Because public broadcasting is essential, not only to our democracy, but to our livelihood. And it exists for a reason, and it's to make sure that everyone in our country, because again, these media entities are corporations, and it costs money to access the New York Times. It
Yep.
costs money to turn on a TV
Everything has
and
a
see the
paywall
news
these days.
play.
You can't read any
Right.
articles.
So you need public broadcasting
Yeah.
that is unbiased and funded to make sure people have access to information so that they can make informed decisions. And our government rescinded funded for public broadcasting. That means they appropriated money prior to Trump being president under the last administration. They appropriated money through the legislative process, and Trump went back and took this money away. And yes, he did do it through the proper channels. This rescission package was voted on by Congress. They did pass this, but again, under the right, because he has the right people in place now to make that happen. But they are defunding public broadcasting. That is spooky as hell.
Yeah. Yes. And thank you for bringing this up because this is major. I listen to NPR every day. It's just really scary to think that not only can he infiltrate the minds of his supporters so deeply, but that he's able to access anything he wants and take it away.
Yeah.
And we're not pushing fear here, but we're trying to live in a reality. And this is the reality of what happened. And I really like the way that Stacey Abrams talks about autocracy in let's break it down and explain it and not use these big words and say, so here's the deal. Your kid will no longer be eligible for free lunch, but the billionaires get to write off their private jets. And
Right.
it's not an exaggeration. This is not hyperbole. This is actually what happened. This is true. This is a fact. So we need to call things what they are and be very clear on what they are. And I think that's how we lead ourselves back to democracy is understanding that the people know that they have rights and how to exercise them. And on that note, I do want to talk about one more Trump topic before we turn this all light and positive.
Oh yeah. So backing up, the Federal Reserve it's both like the central banking system in the United States, and it is also one of the three main financial regulators. So we have the Fed, the Federal Reserve, which people call the Fed, and
Mhm.
then you have FDIC, that's the insurance essentially, and then you have the OCC, the Office Comptroller of Currency. And so those are the three independent federal regulators that oversee the banking system in our country.
And Trump has not been able to really infiltrate at all on this regard. This is one of those things that is just a sacred space where we just let them do their thing, and that's not working in Trump's world. It's not working.
Right.
And he's been upset that they're not dropping interest rates. He's been upset about some of the reports that have been coming out from the Fed. And he's, again, wanting to get his hands in there and wanting to punish people. So he had his people do extensive research into the board, trying to see what he could find and what dirt he could dig up to
Yeah.
in order to get his hands in here.
Yeah.
And the only way that he could remove someone from the board is if he had a just cause. And he hasn't had anything, and it's very difficult to find that. So, what did he do? He had one of his minions go in, and they came to find out that Lisa Cook, who sits on the board and was appointed during the Biden administration, they find out that she has two homes in which she listed her primary residence when she was going to get a mortgage for them. So when you list something as your primary residence, it is common practice that you get better interest rates or a better rate overall because they're giving you that benefit that it's your primary residence. So we don't know all of the information here. We don't know the fine print. But Trump came out with this information and is she's gone and now I get to appoint someone.
Yeah.
What do we think?
I think it's crazy. And I call him out by name, his minion. It's Bill Pulte.
Thank you.
He oversees the Federal Housing Financing Agency, which is basically they oversee Fannie and Freddie Mac. So it's
Okay.
all like the mortgage lending, the government piece of that. And as the director of the Federal Housing Financing Agency, FHFA, he has access to these records, which is why he was able to get this information. And I think it's also very interesting because we have seen Trump come for Jerome Powell, Jay Powell,
Yeah.
for a long time now. He has had his eye set on him. He's the chair. So while they each get a vote, obviously, as the chair, you just have a little bit more sway. He hasn't been successful in trying to undermine Jerome Powell, who he also appointed too, which is like the funny, he like appointed him and he's been coming for him. He's been coming for the renovations at the Fed's office, and he tried to use that as an excuse to delegitimize them. But what he's trying to do is get a majority of the board. And I think someone from the board recently resigned. And so he would just need one more person to that's on his side. Again, their terms are so long that it's not parallel to the president's terms, right? They're not 4-year terms. They're longer than that, so that it's not a political thing. And now he's got these claims. To your point, Casey, they have yet to present the evidence. We don't know the facts or the information yet. He's using this to try to get a majority of the Fed on his side, quote unquote, so
Yep.
that they will lower interest rates. And that would behoove him because essentially changing the interest rates are the Fed's primary policy tool to either ramp up spending in the United States or curb spending. Obviously has huge implications for our economy. And so Lisa Cook at this point says that she's going to fight this, right? I
Yep.
think she already has filed her lawsuit,
Yep.
and we'll see how successful he is and if he really has the cause that he needs. I don't know how far in the legal system this will go, but again, it shows him trying to just take control of every single lever of decision making in governing in this country, particularly one that is intended to be specifically independent
Right.
of politics.
And you have to give credit to Jerome Powell for kind of sticking to his guns on things because I do feel like as a Trump appointee, he easily could be pushing things in the direction that he wants it to go, but he's actually doing his job. So, like, kudos to him for at least that piece. But I do feel like this story rounds out where we're looking and where we're going with the government as it stands today. Just to go back to the checks and balances of democracy and how we can make this feel more positive, I do feel that there are still measures, some measures in place that we have to continue to push forward. And I also think that we need to focus on this being Trump's last presidency, last term, and address the issues that are fundamental to how we got to this place versus always putting his name in the spotlight because it does what he wants us to do versus take back and say, actually, why is the Senate and the House actually allowing this stuff to happen? We need to gut them. Maybe they're the problem. And I think that the more that we communicate and the more that we can see we the people still have power. We are still in a democracy, even if it looks convoluted and even when it starts to feel like things are getting fractured. I think that we have to come together as a community and say, this is not what we want. This is not what we're here for. And there is some hope and promise for us to continue moving. And I think when we look at the Supreme Court, a really good example of that is Amy Coney Barrett. She's super conservative. She pushed Roe v. Wade through. She is a Notre Dame law professor. She's a religious and conservative person, yet she has been siding more and more with the liberals on the bench because when it comes down to it, I think that she holds herself to a very high moral standing and she won't go below the belt. For her, when things align within her conservative vision, she's happy to stay the course. But when things don't align with her on a moral level, she's not. A really good example of this is the case against deportations, which she
Mhm.
sided with the liberals. This was back in April, and she said we cannot use wartime legislation to deport civilians. And it's funny because the full dissent also had lots of Trump pieces layered into it, just stating facts, but still like digs. And she wouldn't co sign on any of that stuff, but they still ended up passing the opinion because of her. And this isn't the first time that's happened. And I feel that when we have people who are at least of moral high ground, that
Mhm.
will change the game. It doesn't mean that we have to agree on every fundamental issue. Like I said, the girl overturned Roe v. Wade. Like, she's not one of the girls for sure, but she is the only woman on the conservative side.
Yeah. What makes me feel a little bit more optimistic is that I think democracy and even to a certain extent authoritarianism rely on populism, right? Like what people want, like what's in favor with the
Right.
general public. And I think we saw Trump fall out of favor with the general public. People are like, okay, you actually did too much, which I
Yep.
think we saw play out in the Biden Trump election and the result of that. And will that, and I think that's the question, will we see that happen again? Will Trump take it too far and lose people? Some of the polling right now is suggesting that it is actually going in the direction and that this is not what the people want. And come election time, they'll make their voices heard and pick a new direction and a new leader. And so, without the will of the people on your side, you're not going to get very far. And then, obviously, to a certain extent, right? Once you have a dictator, it doesn't matter what the people say. So, hopefully, like we don't get there,
Right.
but you still need the people in your court. And I think Trump, too, for his own ego and narcissism, craves that, right?
Right.
Like
He
the
wants to be
people,
popular.
he wants to be like the attention economy.
Mm.
You need the eyes and the attention on you to mobilize, support, and back your decision making. If people speak up, if people continue to back the people that they feel represent them well, we will go in a direction that reflects the will of the people and the common good.
A perfect example of this is the New York City mayoral primary race, in which you had our current mayor, Mayor Adams, who's already disgraced and no one wants him. And then you have Andrew Cuomo entering the race former governor, also disgraced. And it just feels like the same old playbook. And then you have Zoran Mamdani. By all accounts, even the Democrats think that he's too progressive. He came down, he listened to what people wanted to hear. People felt heard, and they went out, and it was the largest turnout for any primary that we race that we've had. And he won by 56%. So to bring that positivity back, the power is in the people's hands. It takes the right candidate to mobilize, it takes the right candidate to speak to people and let them actually feel heard. I don't think that anything that Zoran did was anything crazy. You saw him as like a real person. And there's the phrase, oh, don't be political about it or don't be a politician about it, where people aren't showing their real selves. Yet I think that's actually what's helping. So I hope that the Democrats can really embrace him and this model. And it, based on what we're seeing out of California, Gavin Newsom is really trying. He's really trying to, like, at the very least, put himself out there and put himself on the line. And I think that people see that as admirable and it's going to be more palatable going into future elections.
As we were saying before, I think the important thing here is to be informed,
Yeah.
know what's going on, know
Mhm.
what all these different types of governing are, so that you can make the best decisions for yourself when it comes time to vote, when it comes time to raise your voice on these issues.
Yep, absolutely. And with that said, that's all for us. Tune
Yes.
in next week and we will have something new for you. And as always, don't forget to follow us on our socials, Instagram, TikTok, Substack, YouTube. So that's all. Bye.